Sarah Martinez had always been the kind of person who preferred watching from the sidelines rather than stepping into the spotlight. At 32, she worked as a data analyst for a mid-sized cybersecurity firm in Austin, Texas, spending her days buried in spreadsheets and code patterns that most people would find mind-numbingly boring. Her colleagues saw her as reliable but unremarkable, the type who would nod along in meetings without contributing much beyond the occasional technical clarification. The office dynamics at CyberShield Technologies reflected this perception perfectly. During weekly team meetings, Sarah would sit in the back row, her laptop open, taking meticulous notes while her more outgoing colleagues dominated the discussions. Mark Harrison, the lead security architect, was known for his booming voice and confident presentations. Jessica Chen from the threat intelligence team had a reputation for asking sharp questions that made executives squirm. Even David Park, barely 2 years out of college, commanded attention with his flashy demonstrations of new security tools. Sarah, meanwhile, was often overlooked when it came time for project assignments or speaking opportunities. When clients visited the office, management would parade the charismatic team members through the conference room while Sarah remained at her desk, analyzing network traffic patterns and identifying anomalies that everyone else deemed too tedious to investigate thoroughly. This pattern had defined Sarah's career for nearly 8 years. She had joined CyberShield fresh out of graduate school, armed with a master's degree in computer science and a specialization in network security. Her professors had praised her analytical mind and attention to detail, but, in the corporate world, those qualities seemed less valued than the ability to schmooze with clients or deliver compelling PowerPoint presentations. Her personal life mirrored this professional dynamic. Sarah lived alone in a modest apartment filled with books about cryptography, network protocols, and emerging cyber threats. Her social circle consisted mainly of online forums where security professionals discussed the latest vulnerabilities and attack vectors. She found these digital conversations more stimulating than most face-to-face interactions, where people seemed more interested in office gossip than the fascinating world of digital forensics. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that she spent her days protecting against threats that most people couldn't even comprehend. While her colleagues focused on high-level strategy and client relationships, she was the one who actually understood how attacks unfolded at the technical level. She could read network logs like other people read novels, spotting patterns and irregularities that revealed the fingerprints of malicious actors. Her supervisor, Tom Bradley, had given her the same performance review for 3 consecutive years. Sarah is a dependable team member who completes her assigned tasks efficiently. She would benefit from taking more initiative in client-facing situations and developing stronger leadership skills. The feedback stung not because it was harsh, but because it completely missed the value of her contributions. While others were busy networking and presenting, Sarah was the one actually catching the threats that could have devastated their clients' systems. The perception of Sarah as just a follower became even more pronounced during the company's monthly Innovation Fridays, where employees were encouraged to present new ideas or research findings. Month after month, Sarah would watch as her colleagues delivered presentations about industry trends they had read about in trade publications, while her own deep-dive analyses of emerging attack patterns went unshared. She had identified several sophisticated threat actors that weren't on anyone else's radar, but the thought of standing up in front of the entire team made her stomach churn. This dynamic extended beyond her immediate team. During company-wide meetings, Sarah noticed how certain employees seemed to effortlessly command attention and respect. They spoke with confidence about concepts they had only surface-level understanding of, while Sarah, who could have corrected their misconceptions or provided crucial context, remained silent. It wasn't that she lacked knowledge or opinions, rather, she had learned early in her career that speaking up often led to being dismissed or having her ideas appropriated by louder voices. The breaking point came during a particularly frustrating client meeting where Mark Harrison was presenting what he called revolutionary threat detection capabilities. Sarah recognized immediately that his presentation contained several technical errors that could give the client a false sense of security. She made eye contact with Tom Bradley, hoping he would invite her to clarify the technical details, but he remained focused on Mark's confident delivery. After the meeting, Sarah approached Tom privately to discuss the inaccuracies in the presentation. Tom listened politely but seemed more concerned about maintaining team harmony than addressing the technical issues. "Sarah, I appreciate your attention to detail," he said, "but we need to trust Mark's expertise in client communications. Your role is to support the team with background analysis. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment feeling more frustrated than ever. She had spent years building expertise that her organization claimed to value, yet when it came time to make important decisions or communicate with clients, her knowledge was deemed less important than presentation skills and office politics. She began to wonder if she was wasting her talents in an environment that would never truly appreciate what she brought to the table. Little did Sarah know that her methodical approach to threat analysis and her ability to spot patterns that others missed would soon prove invaluable in ways that no one could have imagined. While her colleagues were focused on the visible aspects of cybersecurity theater, Sarah was developing the skills and knowledge that would eventually make her one of the most sought-after analysts in the field. The irony of her situation was that in trying to stay invisible and avoid office politics, Sarah had developed an almost supernatural ability to see the invisible threats that others missed. Her habit of working quietly in the background had given her a unique perspective on how cyber attacks actually unfolded, rather than how people thought they unfolded. This understanding would soon become her greatest asset in a conflict that would reshape her entire career and force the world to recognize her true capabilities. As Sarah prepared for what she thought would be just another ordinary week of analyzing network traffic and generating reports that few people would read carefully, she had no idea that events were already in motion that would thrust her into a situation where her analytical skills would become a matter of national security. The quiet observer was about to become the most important voice in a room full of experts, whether she was ready for it or not. 3 weeks after the frustrating client meeting, Sarah was working her usual late shift when she noticed something unusual in the network traffic logs of one of CyberShield's largest clients, a Fortune 500 energy company called Meridian Power. It was past 9 in the evening, and the office was nearly empty except for the cleaning crew and Sarah, who often stayed late to avoid the distractions of the busy workday. The anomaly started as a tiny inconsistency in data flow patterns that most analysts would have dismissed as routine network noise. Sarah had been tracking similar irregularities across multiple client networks for several weeks, noting them in a private spreadsheet that she maintained outside of the company's official reporting system. What caught her attention wasn't any single dramatic event, but rather a subtle pattern of coordinated activities that seemed to span multiple organizations across different industries. As she dug deeper into the data, Sarah discovered that the unusual network activity followed a sophisticated pattern of reconnaissance that she had never seen before. The attackers were using a combination of legitimate network tools and custom-crafted malware to map out critical infrastructure systems with surgical precision. Unlike typical cyber criminals who sought quick financial gains, these actors appeared to be conducting long-term surveillance with strategic objectives. Sarah's analysis revealed that the attackers had gained access to Meridian Power's systems approximately 6 months earlier, but instead of causing immediate damage or stealing obvious targets like financial data, they had been quietly mapping the electrical grid infrastructure and studying the control systems that managed power distribution across 3 states. The sophistication of their approach suggested state-level resources and expertise far beyond typical cyber criminal organizations. Working through the night, Sarah traced the attack vectors and discovered that the same threat actors had infiltrated at least 12 other critical infrastructure companies, including water treatment facilities, natural gas pipelines, and telecommunications networks. The scope of the operation was staggering, representing what appeared to be a coordinated effort to gain control over essential services that millions of Americans depended on daily. By dawn, Sarah had compiled a comprehensive analysis that revealed the true extent of the threat. The attackers had positioned themselves to potentially disrupt power, water, communications, and energy supplies simultaneously across multiple regions. The implications were terrifying. They could plunge entire cities into darkness, contaminate water supplies, or disrupt emergency communications during a crisis. When Sarah tried to present her findings to Tom Bradley the next morning, she encountered the same dismissive attitude that had frustrated her for years. Tom glanced at her report briefly and suggested that she was probably seeing connections that didn't really exist. "Sarah, you have a tendency to overthink these things," he said. "What you're describing sounds like a Tom Clancy novel, not real cybersecurity analysis." Mark Harrison was even more dismissive when Tom asked him to review Sarah's findings. "Look, I appreciate Sarah's enthusiasm," Mark said with a condescending smile, "but she's clearly misinterpreting routine maintenance activities and standard network reconnaissance. These energy companies get probed by hackers every day. It's nothing unusual." Jessica Chen from the threat intelligence team was slightly more receptive but ultimately reached the same conclusion. "The technical analysis is impressive," she admitted, "but the scale of what Sarah is suggesting seems unlikely. If this were really happening, other security firms would have detected it by now." Frustrated but not deterred, Sarah decided to reach out to contacts at other cybersecurity companies through her network of online forums. She carefully crafted anonymous posts describing the attack patterns she had discovered, hoping to find other analysts who had observed similar activities. The responses were mixed, with some dismissing her concerns and others expressing interest but lacking the detailed access needed to verify her findings. Meanwhile, Sarah continued monitoring the networks under attack, watching as the threat actors refined their access and positioned themselves for what appeared to be a coordinated assault. She documented every movement, every new tool deployment, every expansion of their access. Her private database grew to include hundreds of indicators of compromise and detailed maps of how the attackers were navigating through interconnected infrastructure systems. The breakthrough came when Sarah discovered that the attackers were using a previously unknown communication protocol to coordinate their activities across the compromised networks. By reverse engineering this protocol, she was able to intercept fragments of their operational communications, revealing that they were operating on a timeline that pointed to a planned attack within the next few weeks. The intercepted communications were partially encrypted, but Sarah's background in cryptography allowed her to decode enough fragments to understand that the operation was codenamed Dark Winter and involved multiple phases designed to maximize disruption during what they referred to as optimal impact conditions. The implications were clear: this wasn't just surveillance, but preparation for a devastating attack on American infrastructure. Armed with this new evidence, Sarah made another attempt to escalate her findings within CyberShield. This time, she prepared a detailed presentation with clear evidence of the coordinated threat, including decrypted communication fragments and technical proof of the attacker's capabilities. She requested an urgent meeting with senior management, hoping that the severity of the threat would overcome their previous skepticism. The meeting did not go as Sarah had hoped. The senior management team, led by CyberShield's chief technology officer, listened politely to her presentation but seemed more concerned about the potential liability of making such serious allegations than about the actual threat she had uncovered. They questioned her methodology, suggested that she might have misinterpreted the data, and ultimately decided that the company should focus on its existing client obligations rather than pursuing what they characterized as speculative threat research. "Sarah, we appreciate your dedication," the CTO said at the end of the meeting, "but we're a commercial cybersecurity firm, not the NSA. Our responsibility is to protect our clients' networks, not to investigate international cyber warfare. I think you've been spending too much time in those online forums reading conspiracy theories." The dismissal was devastating, but Sarah realized that her colleagues' inability to grasp the significance of her discovery was itself part of the problem. The cybersecurity industry had become so focused on reactive measures and marketable solutions that it had lost sight of the sophisticated, long-term threats that truly endangered national security. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of her career and potentially save thousands of lives. If her own company wouldn't take her findings seriously, she would have to find someone who would. She began researching government agencies and independent security researchers who might have the resources and authority to act on her intelligence. As she prepared to take her findings outside of CyberShield, Sarah had no idea that the threat actors she had been tracking were already aware of her investigation. Her careful analysis and persistent digging had not gone unnoticed, and the very people she was trying to stop were beginning to take notice of the quiet analyst who had stumbled upon their most sensitive operations. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only Sarah's technical skills but her courage and determination to do what was right, even when everyone around her insisted she was wrong. The follower was about to become a leader, whether she wanted to or not. Sarah's decision to bypass her company's chain of command marked the beginning of the most intense period of her career. After researching various government contacts, she decided to reach out to Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former NSA analyst who now worked as an independent cybersecurity consultant and maintained a blog that Sarah had been following for years. Dr. Vasquez had a reputation for taking emerging threats seriously and had previously exposed several nation-state cyber operations that other experts had initially dismissed. The initial contact was nerve-wracking. Sarah spent hours crafting an email that would convey the urgency of her findings without sounding like a conspiracy theorist. She included enough technical details to demonstrate her credibility while being careful not to reveal information that could compromise ongoing investigations. When Dr. Vasquez responded within hours requesting a secure video call, Sarah knew she had found someone who understood the gravity of the situation. During their first conversation, Dr. Vasquez listened intently as Sarah walked through her analysis, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated her own deep expertise. Unlike Sarah's colleagues at CyberShield, Dr. Vasquez immediately grasped the implications of the coordinated infrastructure infiltration and the sophisticated communication protocols that Sarah had discovered. "What you're describing aligns with intelligence chatter we've been seeing about a group called Phantom Grid," Dr. Vasquez explained. "They're believed to be a nation-state actor with capabilities that far exceed typical cyber-criminal organizations. The fact that you've managed to map their operations so comprehensively from a commercial perspective is remarkable." Dr. Vasquez connected Sarah with a small network of security researchers and former government analysts who specialized in advanced persistent threats. This group, operating informally but with serious purpose, had been tracking similar activities but lacked the detailed network access that Sarah's position at CyberShield provided. Together, they began building a comprehensive picture of the Phantom Grid operation that was far more extensive than even Sarah had initially realized. Working with this network, Sarah discovered that the infrastructure attacks she had identified were just one component of a larger operation that also included infiltration of government systems, major financial institutions, and military contractors. The threat actors had been positioning themselves for what appeared to be a coordinated assault designed to cripple American society and economy simultaneously. As the investigation deepened, Sarah found herself working 18-hour days, maintaining her regular responsibilities at CyberShield while secretly collaborating with the independent research network. She had to be extremely careful to avoid detection by her own company's monitoring systems, using personal equipment and encrypted communication channels to share sensitive information with her new colleagues. The breakthrough that would change everything came when Sarah intercepted a communication indicating that the planned attack was scheduled to begin during the upcoming Thanksgiving weekend. The timing was strategically chosen to maximize disruption when emergency response capabilities would be reduced and when families across the country would be traveling or gathering for the holiday. Realizing that time was running out, Dr. Vasquez arranged for Sarah to present her findings to a contact at the Department of Homeland Security. The meeting was scheduled for the Monday before Thanksgiving, giving them less than a week to convince government officials to take action based on Sarah's analysis. The presentation at DHS was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. She found herself in a secure conference room facing a panel of senior analysts, intelligence officials, and policymakers who had the authority to initiate a national cybersecurity response. For someone who had spent years avoiding public speaking, the pressure was overwhelming, but Sarah's passion for the technical details and her comprehensive understanding of the threat gave her the confidence she needed. Sarah's presentation was methodical and compelling. She walked the panel through her discovery process, demonstrated the sophisticated attack vectors, displayed the intercepted communications, and mapped out the potential impact of a coordinated infrastructure attack. She had prepared for every possible question and had backup evidence to support each of her conclusions. The response was immediate and dramatic. Within hours of Sarah's presentation, DHS initiated emergency protocols to warn critical infrastructure operators about the imminent threat. The FBI began coordinating with international law enforcement agencies to track down the physical locations of the threat actors. The National Security Agency deployed additional resources to monitor the communication channels that Sarah had identified. However, Sarah's involvement in the government response created immediate problems at CyberShield. When Tom Bradley discovered that Sarah had been sharing client data with outside parties, he was furious. "You've violated every confidentiality agreement you've signed," he told her during a heated confrontation. "We could lose our certifications and face massive lawsuits because of your unauthorized disclosure." Mark Harrison was even more hostile, accusing Sarah of being a grandstanding amateur who had endangered the company's reputation by making wild allegations based on incomplete analysis. "You've always been a loose cannon," he said. "This proves that you don't have the judgment to work in a professional security environment." The company's senior management called an emergency meeting to discuss Sarah's status. While they couldn't publicly criticize her for reporting a legitimate security threat, they were clearly unhappy about the way she had bypassed company protocols and, potentially exposed them to legal liability. Sarah found herself facing suspension pending a comprehensive review of her actions. Meanwhile, the government's response to Sarah's intelligence was unfolding rapidly. Critical infrastructure companies were implementing emergency security measures based on the indicators of compromise that Sarah had identified. Cybersecurity teams across the country were hunting for signs of phantom grid infiltration in their own networks. International intelligence agencies were sharing information about related threats in their own countries. As Thanksgiving week began, Sarah watched from her apartment as the story started to break in major news outlets. Government officials were warning about credible threats to critical infrastructure, though they weren't revealing the specific details of the planned attack or the role that a single analyst had played in uncovering it. On Wednesday evening, the day before Thanksgiving, Sarah received a secure phone call from Dr. Vasquez with stunning news. Law enforcement agencies in 3 countries had simultaneously raided locations associated with the Phantom Grid operation, arresting 12 individuals and seizing computer equipment containing detailed plans for the infrastructure attacks. The raids had been timed to occur just hours before the planned assault was scheduled to begin. "They found everything you predicted," Dr. Vasquez told her. "The attack plans, the infrastructure maps, the communication protocols. Your analysis was completely accurate. You've probably prevented one of the most devastating cyber attacks in history." But, even as Sarah felt relief and vindication, she knew that her professional life had been fundamentally changed. Her colleagues at CyberShield still saw her as someone who had violated protocols and created problems for the company. The government officials she had helped couldn't publicly acknowledge her role without revealing sensitive operational details. She had done the right thing, but at tremendous personal and professional cost. As she prepared for what would likely be her final days at CyberShield, Sarah had no idea that her story was about to take another dramatic turn. The threat actors she had helped capture had been monitoring her investigation more closely than anyone realized, and they had plans that extended far beyond the infrastructure attacks she had already uncovered. The quiet analyst who had been mocked as just a follower was about to discover that sometimes being right carries consequences that extend far beyond professional recognition or career advancement. The Friday after Thanksgiving brought news that would transform Sarah's life in ways she never could have imagined. She was at home, still suspended from CyberShield and uncertain about her future, when Dr. Vasquez called with an urgent update that made her blood run cold. "Sarah, you need to see this immediately," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice tight with concern. "The Phantom Grid operators we arrested were apparently just one cell of a larger network. The real leadership has just released a public statement, and they've mentioned you by name." Sarah rushed to her computer and found herself staring at a professionally produced video that had appeared simultaneously on multiple international news networks and social media platforms. The video featured a figure in shadow, speaking with a digitally altered voice, claiming responsibility for what they called preliminary reconnaissance operations against American infrastructure. But it was the final portion of the video that left Sarah stunned. The shadowy figure specifically named her as the analyst whose unauthorized interference had disrupted their initial timeline, and they issued what could only be interpreted as a threat. "Sarah Martinez of Austin, Texas, believes her small understanding of our capabilities represents victory. She will discover that what she prevented was merely the beginning." Within hours, Sarah's name and photograph were being broadcast around the world. News organizations that had been covering the infrastructure threat story in general terms suddenly had a specific individual to focus on. The quiet analyst who had spent her career avoiding attention found herself at the center of an international news story about cybersecurity and national security. The initial media coverage was a mixture of praise and skepticism. Some outlets portrayed Sarah as a hero who had single-handedly prevented a catastrophic attack on American infrastructure. Others questioned whether a mid-level analyst at a small cybersecurity firm could have really uncovered a threat that major government agencies had missed. The cybersecurity industry was divided between those who celebrated her technical achievement and those who criticized her for bypassing established protocols. The public attention brought both opportunities and dangers that Sarah was completely unprepared for. Within days, she was receiving job offers from major cybersecurity firms, government agencies, and private intelligence companies. At the same time, she was also receiving threatening messages from unknown sources and had to deal with reporters camping outside her apartment building. The situation became even more surreal when the FBI assigned protective agents to monitor Sarah's safety. The threats against her were being taken seriously by law enforcement, who explained that nation-state actors had a history of retaliating against individuals who disrupted their operations. Sarah found herself living under a level of scrutiny and protection that felt completely disconnected from her previous quiet existence. CyberShield's response to the media attention was as predictable as it was disappointing. Rather than supporting Sarah or acknowledging her achievement, company management distanced themselves from her actions and emphasized that she had violated company policies. Tom Bradley gave several interviews portraying Sarah as a well-intentioned but reckless employee who had created legal and ethical problems for the organization. Mark Harrison was even less generous, suggesting to reporters that Sarah's analysis had been lucky guesswork rather than skilled detection. "Anyone can connect dots and see patterns that aren't really there," he said in one particularly hurtful interview. The fact that she happened to be right this time doesn't justify the way she went about it. However, the technical details of Sarah's analysis began to speak for themselves as more information became public. Government officials, speaking anonymously to reporters, confirmed that her work had been extraordinarily sophisticated and accurate. Independent cybersecurity experts who reviewed the declassified portions of her research praised her methodology and the depth of her technical insight. Dr. Vasquez became one of Sarah's strongest advocates, appearing on news programs to explain the significance of what Sarah had accomplished. "What Sarah Martinez did represents the highest level of cybersecurity analysis," she told one national television audience. "She identified a threat that could have devastated American society, and she had the courage to act when her own organization failed to take it seriously." The international cybersecurity community also began to recognize the importance of Sarah's work. Conference organizers started inviting her to speak about advanced threat detection techniques. Professional organizations wanted to present her with awards for her contribution to national security. Academic institutions offered her research positions and opportunities to teach the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. Perhaps most significantly, Sarah discovered that her analysis had inspired changes in how government agencies and private companies approached threat detection. The techniques she had developed for identifying coordinated infrastructure attacks were being adopted as standard procedures. Training programs were being developed based on her methodology. Policymakers were discussing new requirements for threat intelligence sharing between private companies and government agencies. As weeks passed and the immediate crisis subsided, Sarah began to understand the full scope of what her investigation had prevented. Intelligence agencies revealed that the planned Phantom Grid attack would have affected electrical power for over 30 million Americans, contaminated water supplies in 6 major cities, and disrupted communications networks across multiple states. The economic impact alone would have exceeded $100 billion, not counting the human cost of the chaos and confusion that would have resulted. The recognition also brought personal vindication that Sarah had never expected. Colleagues from throughout her career reached out to congratulate her and admit that they had underestimated her capabilities. Former professors contacted her to express pride in her achievements. Even some of her critics at CyberShield began to acknowledge that her technical skills had been more advanced than they had realized. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from other quiet analysts and researchers who had been inspired by Sarah's example. She began receiving messages from cybersecurity professionals around the world who told her that her story had encouraged them to trust their own technical instincts and speak up when they identified serious threats. 6 months after the Phantom Grid crisis, Sarah found herself testifying before Congress about the need for better coordination between private sector threat detection and government response capabilities. Sitting at the witness table in a packed hearing room, facing questions from senators and representatives, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. The woman who had once avoided speaking up in small team meetings was now helping to shape national cybersecurity policy. The analyst who had been dismissed as just a follower had become a recognized leader in her field. The technical expert who had been overlooked for promotion was now being recruited by organizations around the world. As Sarah answered questions about threat detection methodology and intelligence sharing protocols, she realized that her greatest achievement wasn't just preventing a catastrophic attack, but proving that technical expertise and careful analysis could triumph over office politics and conventional wisdom. She had shown that sometimes the quiet voice in the back of the room has the most important things to say. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same traits that had made her seem unremarkable in a corporate environment, her attention to detail, her preference for thorough analysis over quick conclusions, her willingness to work behind the scenes, had ultimately made her indispensable when the stakes were highest. Sarah's story became a case study taught in cybersecurity programs and business schools, illustrating the importance of recognizing and nurturing analytical talent regardless of presentation skills or office politics. Her name became synonymous with technical excellence and professional courage, inspiring a new generation of analysts to trust their expertise and speak up when they identified serious threats. The woman who had been mocked as just a follower had not only found her voice, but had used it to protect millions of people from a threat that few others could have detected or understood. In the end, Sarah Martinez proved that true leadership often comes not from those who seek attention, but from those who seek truth.